Building a life that you don't need to escape. That is the topic of conversation with my guest, Kevin Dahlstrom, who is a four-time founder, CMO, investor, all-around great dude. He's one of my favorite follows on X or Twitter. We're going to talk about some very practical things that you can do to create a more healthy, happy life. We're going to be talking about exercise, diet, sleep, who you hang out with, what you do, the ideal end state that you create for yourself. We're going to talk about saying no. We're going to talk about stopping doing stupid stuff. Lots of great things here. Some of it you might disagree with, some of it you might agree with, but I encourage you to listen to the whole interview because it will challenge you, it will encourage you, and it will give you some insights in what you can do to build a life that you truly enjoy. So let's dive right in. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Hey, Kevin, welcome back to Construction Genius.
Hey, Eric. Glad to be back. You know, I've stopped doing most podcasts, but when you reached out to me, I just view it as an opportunity for you and I to chat. I always enjoy our conversations.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming on. What piqued my interest this time was an epic tweet thread that you had of 50 recommendations, but what it began with is something very simple. On their 50th birthday, some people turn 70 and some turn 30. And, being 54, that got my attention. And so I wanted to get you on the podcast and just talk about that because I have a concern that a lot of people are not as healthy as they could be. And obviously, you look in America with obesity, with various illnesses that people have, with just the stresses of running a business. It's tremendously challenging. So I want to dive into some simple things that people can begin to do to, so to speak, maybe reclaim their health and habits that they can install. So let me just begin with that. What's the premise of that idea that, some people turn 70, some people turn 30? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, the basic idea behind that is that little habits compound, right? And little things done for years and decades end up making a huge difference. That's kind of the core idea behind compounding. I'm a big fan of the word and the concept of compounding in everything, in finance and health and relationships, everything. And, back to this idea of, I think I said, on their 50th birthday, some people turn 70 and some turn 30. If you ever want proof of that, just go to a 30 or 35-year high school reunion, which I did not too long ago. And wow, is it eye-opening? It really is. There is sort of a clear divide between, I'll overly simplify it by saying, the people who have done all the right things and taken care of themselves versus the people who haven't done as good a job. There's a it's visible, right? It's a very noticeable difference. And the more important piece isn't just the way people look, but it's how they feel and how they're able to perform into their 50s and beyond.
Yeah. So that's one thing we're talking about here today is it's very important for us to, you and I are both in our 50s. I know many people who listen to the show, they're not necessarily super young folks. And we're not talking about an aesthetic look. We're not talking about a six pack or anything like that. We're talking about our overall health. And just give us a little bit of background on yourself, Kevin, because, some people may look at you, if you're watching the video, you're wearing, like a casual shirt, you're kind of kicking back at the house. It can be a lot of, well, that's easy for you to say, Kevin, but I work 60, 70 hours a week or I have tremendous responsibilities. Give us some background on how you began to build your habits and where you've come from in your life.
Yeah. So I guess I'll just kind of give the 1 minute version of my sort of way background and then talk about some of my health habits I've developed over the years. So, my background is, grew up in a small town in Texas, kind of a rough childhood, chaotic, went to college. And, I'm a Gen Xer, and in my generation, we're the put your head down and grind generation, right? So we don't ask questions. We just put our heads down and go. And so that's what I did when I got out of college. I, kind of worked my way up the corporate ladder over years and decades, and ended up becoming a chief marketing officer of 3 public companies and another large growth company. Along the way, also started 4 companies, had some exits. So, on Twitter, my bio says, I learned everything the hard way, so you don't have to. So whatever the listeners of this podcast are thinking, or whatever circumstances they're in, I've probably experienced it myself. And to be honest, until I guess maybe my mid 40s, I was that guy. I was grinding it out in the executive suite at a large public company, didn't have the best balance in my life, was financially more successful than ever, but the least happy I had ever been.
Mm-hmm.
And, transitioning now into health, health was always something that I recognized was important and did invest time in, simply because I wanted to perform my best. As you said, for me, it was never about aesthetics. I see guys who, want to get jacked or want to put on a bunch of muscle mass. And what I observe when I look around is that the fittest guys in their 50s and 60s and beyond really weren't focused on being a bodybuilder. They were just focused on being as healthy as they could. And that usually means actually being lean, where you're not going to look super ripped. You might be pretty strong, but you're not going to be a bodybuilder type. So anyway, I just learned over the years, as I said earlier, what it is, there's no silver bullets in health.
Yeah.
It's a lot of little bitty things done right and then compounded for years and decades. So, it's eating, a good diet. My rule of thumb is I try to eat what I call an 80% clean diet, because for me, it's not realistic to be 100% disciplined. I'm not even sure that's healthy psychologically or physically.
Yes.
So, try to eat 80% clean, but then, I also have made exercise an increasingly large part of my life. And the way I think about it is, what you really need to be able to do as you get older, and this is something that you maybe can't do right away, but you can plan for and transition to over time. The older you get, I always say you got to tighten the screws ever tighter. You have to devote more and more time and attention to your health. And for me, that means, I get outside a lot. I do a ton of exercise. It's easy for me because I've had a lifelong passion for rock climbing, and I live here in Boulder, Colorado, where rocks are all, I'm looking out the window at rocks right now. So I spend, 20 hours a week doing exercise, mostly in the form of rock climbing. And so it really, the one point I kind of want to drive home is, adequate exercise isn't going to the gym and working out a few times a week. That's a good start. It really has to become a big part of your lifestyle and even your identity. And that's the great thing about pursuing exercise through a sport or an activity like rock climbing or something else, is that it's something that can become part of your identity. It's something where you can pursue not only fitness, but mastery of a craft.
Yeah, that's interesting. So let's just go through this in a little more detail.
Sure.
You throw out a number like 20 hours a week of exercising, and we may be getting some eye rolls here from folks who are, they're already working 50 hours a week. They have tremendous responsibilities. And again, sometimes you listen to these podcasts and about health and fitness, and you and I are practitioners perhaps, but we're not experts. We don't have degrees or anything, but, and they start to, lay out all these protocols and things like that. And really what we're looking to pursue here is, like you said, some incremental changes that you can then build up over time. And I think you say it really well, where you found a particular passion that you enjoy, and that then helps to motivate you in terms of getting that exercise on a regular basis. So how can someone begin? What are some of the baby steps that someone can take? Let's say they're 40 years old and they're beginning to see that, I got the dad bod going on or the mom bod.
Sure. Yeah.
And
sure.
I know that this is not sustainable. I'm not feeling great. What are some incremental beginnings that people can take?
Yeah, that's a great question. First thing I would say is that consistency is everything. I would rather see someone do something small, but do it consistently, rather than kind of do the exercise version of binge dieting. You know what I mean? Like where you starve yourself and then you binge. I see a lot of people, it's the classic, right? After the new year, the gym is packed full of people. And then 3 weeks later, it's empty. So I'll give you a really specific, great starting point, which is walking. I
Yes.
believe walking is a massively underrated thing to do, not only for fitness or for physical fitness, but also for mental health.
Yes, it is.
It's incredible. And when I say walking, I'm not talking about, walking around the block. I think, go for an hour walk every day after work. Find that time. The harsh reality is, if you are one of those people who, like I used to be, who's working 50 or 60 hours a week, you've got to decide if you're going to prioritize health or not, because you're
Yes.
actually going to be more effective over the long run if you do prioritize health. And that does ultimately probably mean setting boundaries. I mean, that's something I did. I did have to do when I became increasingly passionate about health and fitness, and specifically rock climbing. I began to set boundaries on my work and my schedule. And again, this isn't something you can necessarily do overnight, but if you know what the end goal is, if your end goal is to be able to devote 10, 15, 20 hours a week to exercise, health, and fitness, then that's something that you can work toward over years. It may take years to get there, but you can work toward it.
Yeah. And so let's talk more about walking, because it's something that I do a lot.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of it because of two reasons. Number one, it's low impact, but I think you bring up a very important point here. It has tremendous psychological benefits in terms of giving you a space where you're moving your body, but you're also able to engage your mind and perhaps even relax your mind. Do you find that when you're walking?
Absolutely. And it's very different than other modes of exercise. For example, one of the things I like about climbing is it does the opposite, right? It requires such absolute focus that it clears everything else from my head. Walking is the opposite, right? Where it gives your mind the space to wander. And it's even been shown in studies that even your brain chemicals, kind of change when you're walking so that you are more creative. In a literal sense, your brain is more creative. I could go on and on about walking. So I hear you on the low impact. I am recovering from a pretty severe back injury right now. And, one thing I've learned as I've dove into the world of exercise or injury rehab is the worst thing you can do is stop moving. That's sort of the old school of thought was, you need rest to recover. It's actually not true. For most injuries, you need to continue moving. And I've found walking in particular for my lower back has been incredible. So I walk every day. My wife and I walk our dog together, then I'll usually do a little hike on my own. And I could go on and on about all the benefits. And it's separate and distinct from running. I think running is a different thing. It's a completely different animal.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I encourage people to do, I consciously do this. I do not take my phone when I go outside. And I know that's hard for many executives to hear, but please, for the love of God, leave your phone at home. Yeah. And turn off your text notifications if you have the Apple Watch that sends you texts, and simply get away. Because one thing that Kevin hit on that is tremendously important is it gives your brain space to process stuff. And you may have ideas and insights into the issues that you're facing while you're walking that will be tremendously beneficial to you. But if you spend your time distracted, I see that when I go walking, people sitting there on their phones. Please, guys, put your phone away for half an hour to an hour a day and just stay focused, or allow your mind to be free.
Yeah. And by the way, I can speak to your audience a little bit on that because I'm the world's biggest offender on that.
Yeah.
And it's honestly, when people ask me what my number one personal struggle is, that's usually what I cite is being able to set the phone aside and be present in the moment for whatever I'm doing.
Yes.
And it's much easier said than done. But as you said, especially for anyone that operates at a senior level, a lot of what you're doing is big thinking, creative work, and you have to create space for the magic to happen, basically. So going on a walk, that's a great way. Like you talked about, how do you start with like something small, a habit that you can build on? Yep. Maybe you go on a 30 or 45-minute walk every day. And you start with just that, you leave your phone behind. The rest of the day, you can have your phone at your side, but just for that, try leaving your phone behind. And then that's something to build upon.
And what you'll find if you do that, you'll find you're actually looking forward to that time, because it's the one time where, it's not by your bed. You know how addicted we are to these things, and
Right.
you're away from it, so you can't get it, and you'll find it to be super helpful. Now, what I'd like to do is come back to this idea of rehab. It's really interesting what you were saying about rehab through movement. So, and I know that there are folks listening to this who have lower back issues and all these kinds of things. Tell us a little bit more about that, and how you sort of gained that insight that movement is critical to your rehab.
Yeah. And first thing I'd say is I started writing about my back injury on Twitter, and the response was overwhelming. It's so pervasive out there. I mean,
Yes.
I'd say most people who are our age, and in many cases much younger, have either lower back or knee issues. It's
Right.
pervasive. And have become a huge evangelist for what's called now mobility training or mobility exercise. And
Yeah.
what mobility basically, the basic idea is that you cure these things through movement. And the best way I can summarize mobility, it's in many ways similar to yoga, but it's more like doing specific movements, but under light load. So the
Mm.
core of my mobility routine, for example, is an exercise that's called the anti-aging exercise.
Mhm.
It's called the deep squat. And you can imagine what a
Mm.
deep squat is. You literally
Yep.
just squat down deeply, do reps of that. When you do that under a light load, it's hitting it's hitting your feet, ankles, knees, hips, lower back, shoulders, and it's providing stretching. It's building strength. That is, strengthening those ligaments, those tendons, those muscles in those injured areas is the key to recovery. And look, I've tried everything. I've spared no expense. I've, everything from acupuncture, dry needling, shockwave therapy, laser. I've tried steroid injection. Like, you can go on down the list. I've tried it all. And nothing has been as effective as consistent mobility exercise for any of my injuries. Just side note is, in addition to my back injury, I've always had this like minor nagging right knee problem, right?
Mm.
It's just kind of, when I go on a long hike, it sort of acts up a little bit without really trying to. By doing this mobility routine now for over a year, my knee is completely resolved. It's healthier than it's ever been. And
That's
I would have
great.
told you that was impossible a year ago.
So let's talk more about that. Okay, so you're talking about, I know you're talking about a deep squat under light load. Is there anything else in that mobility routine that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, look, one thing I learned as I sort of dove into this whole field of exercise and rehabilitation science is that world has transformed in the past 10 years.
Yes, it has. Yeah.
Everything that all the things that used to be sort of accepted as the gold standard for rehabbing injuries have been turned on their heads.
Yep.
And it's all about mobility now. So what I'd say to people out there is, if you've got a chronic injury of any kind, go find a good PT who is well-versed in these modern mobility techniques, and
Yep.
they'll give you a program. And I'm talking about, it's a 30-minute commitment every day.
Yep.
But wow, it's the best investment I make every day. You talk about looking forward to things, my morning routine is sacrosanct. So
Yes.
when I go to bed every night, I look forward to getting up. I'm an early riser.
Yep.
I look forward to getting up at about 5. And to be honest, my routine now takes a total of about 90 minutes or so. And
Yep.
about 30 minutes of that is my stretching and mobility work. And by the time I finish it, I feel so good. That's why I look forward to it. I look forward to knowing that I'm going to feel so good. And again, it's not just the body, it's the mind too. By the time I finish my morning routine, it's almost a way to guarantee, Eric, that you're going to have a great day.
Yes. Yeah. So it's so interesting because, this idea of routine is very important. And again, Kevin throws out 90 minutes and you may think that's totally insane, but we're not giving you here, you must do this. We're talking about incremental changes compounded over time. And so if it was only 5 minutes or 10 minutes, that's a great place to start if that's all you can do right now. But I want to go back to this idea of the light load. I just want to hit on that, because when you say light load, what does that look like in your mobility? I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a really important point because, look, I see a lot of guys out there, especially younger guys, who like to post big weightlifting numbers, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
so I'm gonna pick on that strategy a little bit, because and this is probably going to be a little bit controversial because I'm guessing a lot of your listeners enjoy lifting weights and lifting
Sure.
heavy. The
Yeah,
problem
definitely.
with that is pretty obvious. It's just not sustainable, right?
Yeah.
When you're lifting heavy loads, you can get away with it when you're young, but over time it's a guaranteed injury that tends to become chronic. So
Yes.
when I talk about light loads, I'll give you an example. So when I do my deep squats, I do 3 sets of 12. One is body weight.
Yeah.
One is with a 25-pound dumbbell and one's with a 50-pound dumbbell.
Yep.
And so, I never go heavier than 50 pounds, which that's, as you know, Eric, that's a tiny weight when you're doing
Yes.
squats. Like,
Yep.
There's people out there, throwing hundreds of pounds on their back. And, of course, proper form is critical. And believe it or not, if you do these things with proper form, it's actually pretty hard. It's not as easy as it might sound to
No.
just throw around 50 pounds.
Yeah, and one thing that I've done recently, it's made a tremendous difference actually when I go walking, is I bought a weighted vest, and there's a bunch of different ones out there. And I found that walking with a weighted vest, it's like a 25 pound vest, has had a tremendous impact on my core strength. And it's done so without me even noticing, if you know what I mean, because it's a really good vest. It's one of those zip up ones, and it's tremendously helpful.
Well, you're killing multiple birds with one stone there. So that's a form of what they call rucking, where you're carrying weight while you're walking, and that's incredible. Zone 2 exercise has so many benefits. You talk about the core. If you have back issues, strengthening your core in the proper way is the key to getting better. And one thing I'll just mention is Dr. Stuart McGill out of Canada is kind of the preeminent expert in back rehabilitation. He's got a set of exercises. He's written several books you can find on Amazon, but he's got a set of exercises that I do probably at least 5 days a week. And again, it's a 10-minute set of exercises. It's called Stuart McGill's Big Three. And it's a simple set of exercises that really makes a big difference. And they're designed so that they're not dynamic. So all these core exercises he prescribes are static, meaning you're not tensing your core muscles while moving them, which tends to cause injury. They're all kind of static.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah. I've just pulled it up, the McGill Big Three. So that's McGill. So if you want to search that out, Stuart McGill with those big 3 exercises. Now, when you talk about back problems, I think one of the reasons why some people have back problems is because they're too heavy. And, I was in an airport yesterday. It just blows me away here in America. And we know this is true. So we're not doing any fat shaming or anything like that here. But people are just too fat.
Yeah.
We just weigh too much. What are your tips or insights for getting lean and staying lean?
Yeah.
And again, we're not talking about, listen, guys, we're not talking about getting a 6-pack or anything stupid, but if you're 20 pounds overweight or 30 pounds overweight, if you lose 5 or 10 pounds, it can have a tremendous positive impact on your life. So how have you maintained that leanness over time?
Yeah. Well, before I get into that, I want to give you just an eye-opening experience I had recently. So it just so happened that in the month of June, I went to a beach in Florida and I went to a beach in France on the Mediterranean. And wow, what a difference. I would say in Florida, 60 to 70% of people on the beach were overweight and many pretty severely. In Nice, I'm not kidding you, Eric, maybe 1 out of 1,000 people I saw on the beach was overweight.
Wow.
It's so dramatic a difference. And I think actually, it's pretty clear that comes from diet. The American diet is notoriously bad. We eat a lot of processed foods. So the core principles of diet are pretty simple. And I don't think you have to get extreme. We're kind of talking about small changes here. I use this simple thing of just eat clean, eat 80% clean.
What do you mean by clean?
Yeah, exactly.
Clean,
so what does clean mean? It means buying the highest quality ingredients, like real food. So like real, I'm not a vegetarian or vegan. I eat a lot of meat. So, high quality meats, ideally grass fed or, as close to the organic or properly raised as possible, or non-factory farmed. Lots of fruit and vegetables. They always say stay away from the center aisles of the grocery store where all the boxed and packaged food are. Those are garbage. They're toxic garbage foods. Yep. And so, eat real food. And I've found that if you eat clean, you actually don't even have to limit the quantity that much. Because if you eat clean and you're doing a sufficient amount of exercise, that usually is enough for your body to kind of reach its natural set point in terms of weight. And then, of course, for me personally, and I think for most people, sugar is enemy number one, not only because it's empty calories, but also because it's the number one trigger for inflammation. And inflammation is really the root of most, if not all, disease. So, cut out the obvious things, right? Cut out the sodas. And, look, I will admit, I have a huge weakness for ice cream. That's my number one weakness. And I will binge on ice cream, a couple nights a week. But, I think that's okay. That's why I say 80% clean.
Yes.
Where it gets dangerous, because habits, Eric, can cut both ways, right?
Yes.
And so a bad habit that I have gotten into, like even recently, is like ice cream every night. And you know what? Even though I exercise more than 99% of people, I eat a really clean diet. If I'm eating or ice cream every night, I definitely notice it in my performance.
Yes. Yeah. And so this is one of the things is it's really interesting. You cannot out exercise a bad diet. It's really, really important because, and one thing I found to be helpful, and I know not everyone likes doing this, but for me personally, tracking my food has been tremendously enlightening, particularly when it comes to understanding how many carbs I'm eating every day.
Yeah.
Because we can consume carbs so quickly without even knowing it. And pretty soon we're eating in a calorie excess. And as a result of eating in a calorie excess, you're going to put on weight.
Yeah. It is really that simple.
Yeah, it is. And so that's another thing, right? So, I really like it. We're talking about eating clean 80% of the time. And again, there's no magic pills here, guys, when it comes to diet. So, when people are trying to sell you different diets or different ways of doing things, it's really not that hard. All you have to do is eat less than you burn. That's basically, it's physics, right? We can't outrun physics. We can't outrun biology. And then if you're eating stuff that is relatively healthy, and like you said, getting your sugar from good fruit and getting plenty of vegetables and eating good quality meats, it's really not that complicated.
Yep. If you'll allow me, I want to go on a quick tangent about one thing that is the closest thing to a silver bullet that there is in diet and health, and that is fasting. And I'm not talking about extreme fasting here. What I'm talking about is maybe once a month, you go 24 hours where you do water only. And there's nothing easier than that, right? It's actually easier to not eat than to eat. It takes less time. Right. And if you ever want to go down a rabbit hole, Google fasting studies, and the results are nothing short of eye-popping. And what fasting does, just the quick background on fasting, historically, food wasn't always abundant. And so human beings, as we evolved, we went through periods of fasting not by choice, but because it was forced on us. The body adapted so that it uses those periods when it doesn't have to use energy to digest food to clean up the body, essentially. It's a thing called autophagy, where it kills off these bad cells. The studies, the long-term studies around people who fast and long-term cancer rates are just mind-boggling. Like literally 70% reduction in, all types of cancer from very minimal fasting, actually. Go read the studies for yourself. So that's my one plug. That is the closest thing to a silver bullet. If you want to get a jump start, do a 24-hour fast. A lot of guys in particular, one 24-hour fast, they'll drop 5 pounds. Yeah. Right? And then you're off to a great start. And as you know, Eric, these are all momentum games, right?
Yes. Yeah. So it's really interesting because, again, just real quick on the 24-hour fast, you might be thinking, man, I can't go 5 hours without eating. But if you sleep, right, you're 8 hours into your 24 hours right there. And then just sustain that through one day. It's very, very possible, believe me. I want to kick over to this other thing though. One of your tweets, you said, and I'm gonna read it here. It's stop drinking, even in moderation. People find all sorts of ways to justify drinking, but there's no escaping the simple fact that alcohol is a toxin and it limits your potential. People who lead rich, full, health-centered a life don't have space for alcohol. Now, I know that's going to trigger some people, but tell me why are you so adamant about that?
It's taken a lifetime to reach that conclusion, first of all. So I'm not going to represent myself that I've been alcohol-free for decades. Look, I enjoy a good drink as much as anybody. It's fun. It's a social lubricant. I've had some great It creates great memories. But also, if we're being honest, if you think back on some of the dumbest things most people have done, they stem from alcohol use. And just the truth is, and this isn't really an opinion, it's just statement of fact, alcohol is a toxin. It just is. There's nothing positive about it. It degrades your performance in all ways. And yeah, can you get away with a few drinks a week? Sure. I think so. Are you performing optimally? I would say also no. The fact is you're not going to perform your best. And that's especially true. I don't know if you found this too, Eric. As I've gotten older, I've noticed that I'm more and more sensitive to alcohol as well. It takes me longer if I go out and have, 3, 4, 5 drinks, I don't feel good all of the next day. Whereas, when I was 20 years old, I could go out and have 6 drinks and next morning I'm playing basketball, right? And I feel by noon, I'm feeling 100%. And so, look, again, back to this idea of small habits and compounding. It's just like ice cream, right? It's like, I often do this math in my head. It's like, if I have ice cream 3 nights a week, that's 150 times a year or 1,500 times over a decade. That makes a difference. That starts to make a difference. It might be small, but you add that habit with 20 others just like it. And it's, a buddy of mine calls it stacking the pancakes. Those things add up and gets to a tall stack pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know I stopped drinking a number of years ago. I think it was like three or 4 years ago. And it's had a tremendous positive impact. And again, I'm not saying this as a sort of you must stop drinking. If you drink, you're an evil person, because I don't think that's true. And I, like you said, it is possible to drink in moderation. But that idea of it being a toxin, it's really, really interesting to think about that and to understand that when you are drinking, you are poisoning yourself to one degree or another. And you might want to reflect on that in terms of how it affects your health moving forward.
I think maybe the most important point I can make is for many years, I would have called myself a casual drinker, right? I didn't drink very much, but I'd have a drink here or there, go have a beer with my friends, whatever. And I found that was a slippery slope. It's really hard to be a casual drinker because you're always having this internal debate. Should I have another drink? Should I not? What blew my mind, Eric, is when I stopped drinking completely, it's actually much easier to not drink at all than to be a casual drinker because there's no decision to be made. In fact, early on, when I first stopped drinking completely, I would say in group settings, I would sometimes say I'm sober, which, sort of has an implication to it that doesn't apply to me. Man, people will lay off immediately. There's no more peer pressure. But I really I've found that just saying I don't drink, there's no decision to be made. There's no pressure. There's none of that. And the good news is, you'll remember this, when I started my career, it would have been kind of unusual and maybe a little awkward to go out for a business dinner and not drink at all. Like you would have been sort of an outcast. That's changed quite a bit. There's a lot of people out there that have made the same decision not to drink.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I agree that that's the case. And I know in construction particularly, and there's a lot of heavy drinking that goes on in construction. And again, I'm not saying this to be some sort of scold or anything like that. Each person needs to make their own individual decision, but there is a tremendous benefit. And I want to make a point here, and this is really important because this goes beyond drinking now. It's this idea of the internal debate. And I think that's tremendously powerful because one of your tweets, it was number 19, it said, "Stop doing dumb things." As Leo Tolstoy said, people try to do all sorts of clever and difficult things to improve life instead of doing the simplest, easiest thing, refusing to participate in activities that make life bad.
Yeah. There's so much focus on all the smart things we can do to get better, faster, healthier, richer. Yep. And no one ever talks about just avoiding dumb things. It's funny you bring this up because I was just on a walk with my wife right before I stepped into this podcast. And we were talking about how, we haven't always made the greatest decisions, but one thing we've both done a great job of is not doing stupid things. Right.
Yes.
And there's a whole lot to be said for just avoiding the things that are going to make your life miserable. Easier said than done.
Yes.
But it's a huge part of having a great life, in my opinion.
Yeah. So it's this interesting thing about the internal debate again. So I think it would be interesting just for the listeners here think about those 2 or 3 things, those habits that you have that require that internal debate. So, I have an internal debate sometimes about exercise, but that's a positive internal debate, right? Am I going to go or am I not going to go?
Right.
But what you described about alcohol, just going back to that, it can be applied to alcohol. It could apply to a variety of different choices. But most of those negative internal debates happen when the choice that we're going to make is one that has potential negative impact on us.
Yeah. And you know what we're talking about really here, Eric, is playing the long game. The older I get, the more I'm interested in long games and very uninterested in short-term outcomes.
Yes.
There's a great quote from I think he's a Russian power lifter named Jerzy Gregorek. You've probably seen it, where he says, hard choices, easy life, easy choices, hard life.
Yes.
It's so simple and so true. It's like in everything you do, just playing the long game, extrapolating these decisions out over months and years and decades. And what does that look like?
Hey, this is Eric, and I know I'm enjoying this interview with Kevin. I hope you are too. Quick break. Here's my book, Construction Genius, Effective Hands-On, Practical, Simple, No BS Leadership Strategy, Sales, and Marketing Advice for Construction Companies. I get the title here, the Effective Hands-On title, from one of my clients who took my leadership course and said that Eric's stuff is effective, hands-on, simple, practical, and no BS. So go out to Amazon right now, buy a copy for yourself and for the leaders in your organization. If you buy 10 or more copies, shoot me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com, and I will do a 1-hour question and answers and bonus leadership training segment for you via Zoom. I normally charge $3,500 for that. You get it for under $200 just by purchasing 10 of the books at $19.99 each on Amazon. All right. Link in the show notes. Back to our interview with Kevin. And so it's really interesting, right? Because another tweet that you have here, and again, we're not experts on health, and we don't play them on TV or on podcasts, but you said something that it really interests me here. Avoid mainstream medicine except as a last resort. The results are in our healthcare, or more appropriately, sick care system is badly broken and only makes people sicker. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, boy, I could go on about this for a long time, but I'll try to keep it short.
Yeah.
First of all, I take a little bit of exception with your disclaimer.
Yes.
I actually think I do consider myself an expert on health.
Excellent.
I've been studying it for 30 years.
Yep.
I don't consider most mainstream doctors experts on health. They have some expertise in sickness.
Yes.
But I'm not interested in sickness. I'm interested in avoiding sickness. And so what I say about our medical system, and I'm talking about kind of the mainstream, like medical industrial complex we're all familiar with.
Yep.
Our medical system is incredible for acute illness and injury. If I go into an ER and my femur is snapped in half, that's where I want to be. I want those doctors fixing it because they're really good at it. But as good as our medical system is at acute care, they're equally bad at chronic care. Mm-hmm. And chronic illness has become an epidemic. It's kind of finally starting to get us some awareness.
Yep.
And that takes many, many forms. But the problem is chronic illness. There is no silver bullet, right? And a lot of the things that doctors will prescribe to treat the symptoms do actually make things worse over time. They don't address the root cause.
Yes.
Whereas the real solutions for most chronic illness are the basics that you and I have been talking about since we started recording here today.
Yes. So that's the thing. And I want to hit on those basics. And I think this is tremendously important. We've talked about exercise. Mm-hmm. We've talked about nutrition. We haven't yet talked about sleep. So let's hit on sleep at the moment, now. Can you go to the sleep, what you found with sleep?
Well, sleep is foundational. And I'm laughing because it just so happens that last night after my wife and I went to bed, my 17-year-old daughter she was cold. So she turned the thermostat way up. Of course, she overcorrected, of course.
Yeah.
And so it was like 78 degrees in our room and I slept horribly. And you know what? I can feel it today. I woke up, I didn't feel sharp mentally. My exercises were tough. And I told her, I said, Allie, that one decision you made is going to cost me the day.
Yeah,
Right.
right. Just stick it to her.
Yeah. Yeah. And she's like, anything else to say, Dad?
You're right.
But yeah, I mean, that's just a good example. Like sleep is, arguably the foundation.
Yes.
Now, all these things obviously work together, right?
Yes,
You
they
get way
do.
better sleep if you're exercising and eating well. And
Yes.
there's lots of little things you can do to optimize. Like sleep's one of those great ones. To your, kind of the theme of this show today is like little things you can do to improve your life. Sleep's a great example of that, where like the little things add up quickly. So a huge one is not eating for several hours before you go to bed.
Yes.
I'd say like definitely not after dinner, and ideally even have like an early dinner where you've haven't eaten in, let's say, 5 or 6 hours before you get. That's kind of optimal, but at least a couple hours.
Yes.
No screen time, at least an hour, ideally a couple hours before you go to bed. Keep your room at a good temperature for you, which for me is I like to sleep cold. Another little one that's a huge improvement is covering up all the LED lights in your room with black electrical tape. So that you're in a dark room. It's not only the darkness, but LED has an impact on your brain.
Yeah.
Those wavelengths, so little hacks like that. And then there's also a couple supplements, by the way, that I find really effective. One is an herb called ashwagandha. If you tend to have like a racing thoughts when you go to bed, it really calms the nervous system and shuts down those thoughts. Taking magnesium at bedtime really helps. But yeah, I mean, there's nobody is built different. The vast majority of human beings need a good solid 8 hours of sleep every night. And that's especially true if you're older. It's especially true if you exercise a lot or have a stressful job, which we all do.
Yes.
So sleep is absolutely a foundational pillar of health.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've talked about food. And when I think about this, I think about it in this way. Food, the word that I always remember is moderation.
Yeah.
Right. And like you said, 80% clean. Right. So let's not be, we're not going to be, some sort of food fascist or something like that, where it has to be, 100% all the time. 80% clean. Exercise is consistency, like we've talked about. And for you, if consistency is 25, 30 minutes a day, be consistent.
Yep.
And then with sleep, it's sufficiency, knowing how much sleep you need and being consistent. And I agree with you there, Kevin, on the eating part. I find that if I eat anywhere close to bedtime, it really ruins the way that I sleep.
Right.
And then having the room dark and having the room at a good temperature, those things really, really help.
Correct. And, I think one thing that a lot of people just don't really think about related to eating is that the amount of energy that digestion consumes.
Yes.
When you eat, most of your body's resources and energy are diverted to digesting that food.
Right.
And so like a rule of thumb that I like to use is I like to stop eating when I'm like just barely satisfied, right? And as you know, like there's a tendency to always like be stuffed at every meal. That's a uniquely American thing.
Yes.
But I find like always feeling a little bit hungry. Like for example, if you struggle with afternoon fatigue, try just eating more frequent meals, but smaller, and always remain just a little bit hungry. You might find that your energy level goes way up.
Yep. Yep. So right now we've talked about food, we've talked about exercise, we've talked about eating well. All of those things will relate to keeping us out of this health care or sick care system of ours. We talked about don't do stupid stuff, right? That's tremendously important. Let's talk about community here a little bit. What have you found in terms of the relationships that you have? You've mentioned your wife a couple of times. You've mentioned rock climbing, and I know you have a community involved with that. Tell us a little bit more about how a community of like-minded people is tremendously important in terms of health.
It's another one of those pillars. And, we could even throw in there, I'm sure you were going to get to it anyways, almost like borders into the spiritual side of things as well.
Yep. Yep.
But yeah, I mean, look, ultimately that's arguably like the most important thing is like, do you have good community? I think many, many studies show that like everything from depression to physical health is dramatically impacted by your sense of community. And that's one thing I always say about like having a passionate pursuit like rock climbing.
Yeah.
I always say I came for the climbing, I stayed for the people.
Yeah, right.
And because what I found in rock climbing was a community of people who are my tribe, basically.
Right.
For a lot of us, especially if we're like busy business guys, we end up just by default building our friend group from work, or
Yes.
maybe it's neighbors. Well, really, you actually don't have a lot in common with those people. Like when you kind of dig below the surface, the fact that you
Yeah.
just happen to work at the same company or do sort of this similar job, there's much more to us than work. In fact, work is not even the biggest part of us in most cases. And so,
Right.
find your tribe. And I always say, like, find your passionate pursuit, and you'll find your tribe. I have a great story that I have to tell because
Please.
it's a powerful explainer. So there was a guy, a good friend of mine, who I founded a company with about 10 years ago. Very successful guy, like had success in the corporate world. And then he ran this company that we'd founded. We had a lot of success. And then his marriage came to an end, and he went through just a very, very nasty divorce, child custody and fighting for money. And he was in a very, very dark place, like without getting into details, like the darkest place you can imagine.
Yes.
Out of desperation, he rekindled his teenage love of BMX racing. And I didn't even know there was like an adult BMX leagues.
Yeah, right.
He joined this BMX league, and I kind of lost touch with him for a while. I talked to him about a year later, and he said, "Kevin, I'm not exaggerating when I say that BMX racing saved my life."
Right.
He said, "I met people who are all of my friends now come from the BMX world. I've started dating again. I have something to look forward to every day." And so I think that's what it's all about. It's all of these things. It's, in the case of rock climbing or BMX racing, the beauty is you're killing multiple birds with one stone, right? You've got this incredible activity that gives you lots of exercise. It gives you sunshine. It gives you connection with nature. It introduces you to people who are likely to be of like mind.
Yep.
It does all of these things, and it does transform lives. Climbing transformed my life. It changed the direction of my life, and I've seen it play out with others. And look, I talk a lot about rock climbing. Find your thing, right?
Yes.
It can be anything. It doesn't even have to be a physical activity necessarily, but find that thing that it's like rekindling your childhood joy. Find that thing that just brings you inherent joy.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that I love to do is I love to play my guitar, and I find in that it's really interesting because I spend all day, you like using my brain and my mouth, but not doing much with my hands, and I'm not the most practical, handy guy in the world, which is ironic since, I work, with construction companies, but I'm just looking at my guitar right now. And one of the joys of my life is picking up the guitar and just spending time doing something that's tactile and in even so different than what we would do on a day-to-day basis.
That's right. Well, music's an incredible outlet. And I think you hit upon a key point with this idea of something tactile. Like even going out in your backyard and building something, like build a shed, that is, it's a spiritual experience is what it really is.
Yeah. It's very interesting. And it's interesting. You one of your tweets, which I found really good, was this idea of the goal is not to retire and do nothing. And I'd like to talk about that because so many of us, we're in this sort of this swamp or this sea of, we're in America, this idea of, you work 30, 40 years and then you retire. And I understand that. And I understand that's something that people want to do. What's your view on retirement and vocation and continuing to work and on all those kinds of things as you age?
Yeah. Well, I'll put it flatly. I mean, I believe the old retirement paradigm is broken, has always been broken. The idea that you, work, as you said, for 30 or 40 years, and then you reach, one point in time where you literally stop work completely. I don't think that's a healthy way to live. I mean, what keeps us young and keeps us engaged is having challenge, right? But what you can do is you can move toward a situation where you can choose your challenges, when you can choose your work. And so that's as good as it gets, in my opinion. You always want to, another one of my things with an 80% measure is I say you want to be, nirvana for me is controlling 80% of my schedule. Now, why is it 80% and not 100%?
Yeah.
Because I still believe it's important to be on the hook, to have a little skin in the game.
Yeah.
You have to, everybody needs to answer to someone.
Yeah.
And because otherwise, what I've observed across many, many people who have had outlandish business success, financial success, and then they end up being miserable because they don't know what to do with their time.
Yes.
You always need to keep a little bit of hunger. You need to be on the hook for some things.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we're we're not talking about living sort of an unstructured, undisciplined, just kind of do whatever you want. Because a lot of what we're talking about here, it requires tremendous discipline and self-control and habit building. But once you begin to build those habits, then they become inherent because become habits, and there's sort of a freedom in that perhaps you haven't experienced previously.
Yeah. I mean, what we're really talking about is building a life that you don't need to escape. And, that doesn't happen overnight. There's an exercise that I promote a lot that I came up with when I was going through a lot of this kind of sort of midlife, I'll call it a midlife crisis for lack of a better term, is
Yep.
I call this exercise the ideal end state. And it's a very simple exercise that I found to be incredibly powerful. Literally
Yes.
what you do is you just take out a piece of paper and bullet point out, and if you could have any life you want, what would it look like on a day-to-day basis? And you should be as detailed as possible. So like on my list, it says things like eat 80% clean, regular time in nature, lots of sunshine,
Yep.
rock climbing, 4 or 5 times a week. It's that level of specificity. There's 20 or 30 things on my list. The reason that's eye-opening is twofold. Number one, it gives you a stake in the ground that you can move toward, and it highlights the gap between where you are and where you want to be. So
Yes.
often like illuminates the path in front of you, helps to make decisions really clear. The second thing that's really powerful is when people write out their ideal end state and then they reflect on that list, they're almost always shocked at that most of the things on the list don't require huge sums of money.
Yes.
We have this belief in our head that's been ingrained in us by society that you
Yep.
need to have millions and millions of dollars to quote unquote retire or control your time. That's just not the case. It turns out that the best things in life are free. I mean, it's kind of a cliche statement, but it really is true. And the proof of that is going through this exercise and literally list out what that ideal life looks like. It probably looks a lot more like just having the flexibility to do things when you want, to be surrounded by people you love,
Yep.
and to do a lot of the activities that will be on your list ends up being like free or close to free.
And it's interesting. So let's talk about that because again, people, they worry about their retirement. But if we're let's say we buy into some of the stuff that we've been talking here today, the one thing that you are going to want to really focus your money on is actually doing things like buying quality food,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who cares what kind of a car you have, right? If you're eating crap food, who cares if you live in a 20,000-foot mansion? If you feel like garbage every time you wake up in the morning because you don't exercise consistently, you don't eat right, and you don't hang around with people who share your values. These things are not, like you said, it's so important. These things are not expensive, but they are priceless if you can nail those things down.
Yeah. Well, usually, and not always, but usually things like, fancy cars are cheap substitutes for the real thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's nothing wrong with having a fancy car. If you want to drive a Porsche or a Lambo, by all means do. But what I would say is for all those things, ask if, does this bring me true joy or not?
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't, then it's taking up space that could be occupied by something that does bring true joy. And, I've learned a lot of those lessons the hard way myself.
Yep. And it's interesting. So I'll tell you about that because I spend a lot of time sometimes thinking about, what kind of car to drive, right? And I always have this little game in my head. And this always happens after I test drive a car. I test drive a car and I'm thinking that I'm going to have some sort of life-changing experience. And then all of a sudden it's just a guitar. It's just a car. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then what's interesting is I have a Martin guitar. And a Martin is not a cheap brand, right? And so I spent, relatively speaking, quite a lot of money on my guitar. And I was playing it a couple of days ago, and my daughter was just listening to me play. And because we have a couple of guitars in the house, and we have this one that we take camping, and it's kind of crap, but it does the job. And when you compare the crap guitar with the Martin guitar, there's just no comparison.
Yeah.
And so there is a genuine difference of experience.
Yep.
Playing one versus playing the other. And so when you're making these purchases, one of the things for you to think about is there a genuine difference in experience between what you're buying for maybe, let's say, $1,000 and what you're buying for $10,000? If
Right.
there is, and you can experience that, and that makes a difference, then that's something to take into consideration. But if there isn't, then perhaps that $1,000 purchase really does make sense.
Yeah. And I'll give you you gave a personal example. I'll give another personal example where, for me, I'm not really a car guy. So
Yeah.
I drive a 15-year-old car that has 180,000 miles on it. And I love that truck because it's got all my climbing gear nicely organized in it. And my
Nice.
mechanic always reminds me every time I get it repaired, the repairs cost more than the car is worth.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, but I love that car. A fancy car would not bring me joy. But the flip side of that is we live in a very large, expensive house here in Boulder.
Yep.
Why? Because that house brings us huge joy.
Yes.
We have visitors all summer. Families stay with us. We can
Yes.
offer our home to others, and we entertain a lot. This big house brings us a lot of joy. So in that case, making a big purchase does make sense, and it's individual to everyone.
Yes.
I think the key is just ask that question. It's like, is this going to create joy for me? Is that experience that this brings going to create joy for me?
Yeah,
And
and so this is key, right? Because when we're saying all these things here, right, guys, we're not saying you must do this and you mustn't do that when it comes to these subjective choices. But that is a really good indicator. So perhaps what you can do is give yourself like a 3-month check-in after you make a large purchase, and ask yourself, is it giving you that return on investment, both not just financially but emotionally, like you're describing, that return on investment that you expected, or are you disappointed and then you just have another hole that you need to fill with another purchase?
Yeah. And I think a key saying here is everything you own owns a piece of you.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that I found that to really be quite literally true. Like there is a burden, financial, emotional, and otherwise, with everything you own. And so everything you own also crowds out something else. There's an opportunity cost.
Yeah.
And so, what we're really talking about here is a form of minimalism, which, I do subscribe to. I'm a big fan of minimalism. It's not what most people think it is. Minimalism isn't about living like a monk and sacrificing joy. It's literally the opposite. It's making space for more joy. So getting rid of the things that don't bring you true joy so that you can gorge on the things that do. What does that look like in my life? Because I became so passionate about climbing, as you know, Eric, I rebooted my life to be able to spend more time climbing. That's why I'm able to spend 20 hours a week. It didn't happen by accident.
Yep.
That was the deliberate plan that took years to carry out. But it happened because I recognized that that's what brings me joy.
Right. And it's interesting because so many people think that they can't, like you said, reboot their lives. But there's one thing that you said, one of your tweets that was really, really important. And it's the one that says, say no, protect your time and energy like it's your most precious asset, because it is. Why don't we end our conversation here by you diving into that one key thing about saying no?
Yeah, well, this is, I'll even expand it a little bit to a concept that I really love called the time billionaire.
Yes.
Right. And so if you're listening to this and let's say you're under 50, you're a time billionaire, which means you've got 1 billion seconds or more left to live in your life.
Yep.
And that really is, it's a finite currency. It's your most valuable currency. If you don't believe that, then let me pose this question to you. Would you trade places with Warren Buffett, who's worth $130 billion, but is 93 years old, I believe?
Yep.
The answer is, of course you wouldn't, right?
Nope.
No amount of money in the world can make up for that loss of time. And so really the only question that matters is, how are you going to spend your time? And to our earlier point, a lot of the things that bring joy don't cost a lot of money. They just, they do require time. So that was kind of, that was the epiphany for me, is really reorganizing my life away from the pursuit of money at all cost and toward the pursuit of owning my time.
Yes.
That made a much bigger difference in my life. Related to that, the concept you mentioned of saying no, if time is your most valuable currency, you have to guard it like the precious resource it really is.
Yes.
And so it's easy to go through life and agree or give away your time for free, but that stuff adds up quickly. It's again, like an example of like compounding in habits in a bad way. I have a friend of mine, Paul, who has gone to the extreme of, just as a thought exercise, he says that his time is worth $1 million an hour.
Yes.
Right? And of course, that's an absurd thought, but it makes the point that, yeah, if he's going to devote his time to something, it's got to be incredibly high impact.
Yes. And so I actually use that concept. I have a number in my head for everything that I do, particularly related to my business. And if it falls below that, then I don't do it. I have someone else do it. But I think what's really important with this idea of time is going back to this, the concept of writing out your end state and thinking about the things you need to do to get to that end state. And then being really, really aggressive about saying no to everything that doesn't get you to that end state.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, I think I posted something actually yesterday on Twitter where I said, my number one piece of advice to young people, because I have a lot of young people come to me and they want to get, my advice on a career decision or how they can build a great life or whatever. And my number one piece of advice is whatever you do, be deliberate about it. Like, don't just go with the flow, because it turns out if you go with the flow, most of what society tells us is just wrong.
It is.
Right? About what it takes to build a happy life.
Yep.
So be very deliberate. There's no one size fits all formula. There's no one path that's best for everybody.
Yep.
Choose your own path, but whatever you do, be deliberate. And also, it's never too late to pivot. If you realize you go down that path away deliberately and decide that you need to make some course corrections, you can do that. It's never too late to pivot.
Yeah, it's cool you say that. I was watching a little video yesterday. This woman, it was just a shot of a time lapse of a woman on a treadmill, and when she began on this treadmill, she was severely obese, and it was over, and it wasn't right away. It was over 3 years, but she transformed from this severely obese woman to this beautiful woman, but it was because she showed up every day and got on that treadmill and took care of her business.
Yep. And also that consistency in making the hard choice to course correct when you need to. I mean, I think last time I was on your show, I talked about how I did this reboot and walked away from, a very large sum of money to gain control of my time and to have a life that was more aligned with my ideal end state. And that's not easy. Like, people will tell you you're crazy, but those hard choices are the ones that pay off the biggest.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent, man. Well, we've got an hour. I know we could go much longer. Kevin, you've mentioned Twitter a couple of times. Tell people how we can get in touch with you, how we can connect with you.
Yeah. Twitter, or I guess it's now called X, is my writing practice. I write about all the things I've learned, and you see a little bit of rock climbing in there as well. You can find me on Twitter. My handle is @Camp4, CAMP, the number 4. It's a rock climbing reference, not surprisingly.
Nice. Excellent. So if you want to follow Kevin on Twitter, that's where he's at, or on X. Kevin, dude, I knew we were going to have a great conversation. We could go all day. I appreciate you coming on, and thanks a lot.
I always enjoy our chats, Eric. Really fun.
On. All right. It's 10:40 a.m. on Friday, August 23rd. Just finished recording this interview with Kevin. Really, really appreciate having him on the show. And you know what I'm going to do right now? I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to put on my weighted vest, get my dog, and go for a nice walk down by the river near my house. So I hope you do something like that as a result of what you've listened to here today. Make some changes in your exercise, your sleep, your diet. Think about the choices you're making that aren't good choices, that you have to have those internal debates about. Think about all that stuff, because it can really help you to work through some of the issues that you have in your life and build a life that you don't want to escape. Thanks to Kevin again. Thank you for listening to this episode. Share it with other people, and I'll catch you on the next one.